Where does the myth of white privilege come from? Maurice Mcleod, CEO of Race on the Agenda. Maurice, how are you doing, sir?
Hello, Ian.
We can agree. We've talked about these things many, many times. It's a myth, right? White privilege. I don't have any. You and me, probably from similar backgrounds. I don't have any privilege, Maurice.
I don't think I've ever agreed that it's a myth. I don't think it's a myth at all. I understand that some people don't really understand the term, and this causes all sorts of, mental gymnastics and pain. But it's a very clear thing that I think does exist within our society. There is a difference between your experiences and mine, I'm afraid.
Can you explain then in kind of layman's terms? Well, how would you define white privilege?
Sorry. I'm sorry, Ian. I missed that. Can you
That's
repeat?
sorry. I apologise. Yeah, the line dropped out for that second. Can you define then, Maurice, white privilege? What you think it is?
Yeah. Oh, what's going on with this camera? White privilege basically means that there are a set of challenges that people who aren't white face. That if you are white, you manage to sort of sidestep. No one, and what you'll say is, oh, there's white people who have loads of difficulties or loads of problems in their lives. Of course there are, but those problems and those difficulties aren't because of their race. They're because of class, or where they live in the country, or they've got a disability, or they're LGBTQ, or whatever it might be. There are all sorts of other challenges, but being in this country, being white isn't one of those challenges. So you have a privilege that people who aren't white don't have.
But that's not a privilege, is it? I mean, that would be an imbalance, but it's not a privilege to be treated correctly.
I agree. So maybe what we're saying is, and this is the point. No, privilege, the term privilege, I think maybe confuses things, because you think privilege, you think, oh, showered in wealth and everything's all right for you. It doesn't mean that. It means you have the privilege.
It's inflammatory though, isn't it? It's like the race industry, the race hustlers love it because it's inflammatory. It starts a row. It kicks things off.
If we're talking about inflammatory, call in a group of people who are trying to end racism race hustlers. That's probably inflammatory. But
no, everybody wants to end racism. That's a given. I mean, I've never met anybody who doesn't want to end racism.
Then why does it still exist, Ian? If everybody wants to end racism, why is it still such a big thing?
But why does any other crime still exist? I mean, there's all sorts of criminality out there, and that, sadly, is one of them. I'd like to see it all go, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, sure, but if you ask why are there other crimes, because there are criminals. You're suggesting everyone wants to end racism, which means there's no racists. I don't think that's true.
Well, clearly, when I say everybody wants, most people that I would meet, that you would meet, would want to end racism. I don't know. I've never met anybody who says, "Oh, I'd love to perpetuate racism. It's great." No one thinks that.
I think the people booing the England fans taking a knee probably think that. I think that the people...
Why do they think that? Well, that's just because it's a ridiculous and redundant gesture. That's the reason why they're upset.
Tell that to the players in Hungary who got racially abused. I don't think it's redundant.
Well, that's a whole different thing. That's not the same as taking the knee.
They're taking a knee against racism, against structural racism, about racism that exists in society.
Yes, but if somebody happens to genuinely think it's not the right way to advance that argument, and we stick with what we've successfully used, shows racism the red card, the kick it out campaign, it's all done very, very well, almost eradicated racism in grounds in this country.
Well, that's sadly not true. I was involved.
Well, that's mostly true, Maurice. You know,
I was involved in Kick It Out 20 odd years ago, sure. Ian, and yes, there was a massive change in what happens on the terraces.
Huge.
I would not have gone as a young man in the 70s to Millwall or Chelsea. I just wouldn't have done it. Now that's not the case.
There you go. So it worked. And now somebody comes along and says, let's have another gesture. Where it's not. No, it's creeping back in online, isn't it? You've got a few bozos on Twitter that anonymously sit there, the keyboard warriors firing off racial abuse. As I understand it, after the Euros, mostly not in this country, but people do exist in that respect. I'm not disputing that. But that's right. I mean, if you judge society by what happens on Twitter, then we're in a really strange place, because all manner of criminality takes place there.
Of course. I don't think that's the argument. What I would say is, yes, there are a number of people who are opposed to any moves to talk about racism or deal with racism. That's why you're getting so animated by the term white privilege. I mean, but maybe a better question is, why does it bother you? Why does it bother you that Robert?
Because it doesn't exist. Well, because Robert Preston is sort of self-flagellating, saying, "Oh, look at me. I'm a." He now said in that same interview that his current setup, he's the only white middle-aged bloke there, and he said that like it was a good thing, and I thought, well, that's also weird, isn't it? Well, he's celebrating the fact that he's not even, if you look at it this way, his colour isn't even represented in his own workplace.
He said white middle class, didn't he, though?
Yeah, white middle class, yeah. He's the only
different.
person.
Here's a thing. So you completely ignored the fact that there are white people who are working class. 7%.
No, I'm one of them. I talked about it at the very beginning of the programme. I mean, I understand that, but I don't think white working class people get much of a look in either in some of those jobs.
They should. Then let's talk about class privilege as well.
But it's about class. It's more about class. You think when the Pestons of this world started their heady journey, and the ones, even the Dimblebys before that, those kind of people, I mean, there weren't any working class people in the game. There weren't any black faces in the game.
Or very
few. They were the only people there. So if you fast forward 30 years and you look at boardrooms and TV shows and various people in the makeup of different staff forces in different companies, it's no big surprise that most of them are going to be white blokes, because that's how it began.
I know, and so isn't it good that on an important show like Pestons, he can say that that's not the case anymore?
But it's not white privilege, is it? He went to Oxbridge, his old man was in the House of Lords. There's the connection.
Sure, but I know many people of colour who went to Oxbridge. They don't have dads in the House of Lords, but that's part of generational privilege as well. That's something you don't get as often. There's how many black lords? There's Lord Willie and maybe a couple of others. So there aren't that many black lords to be my dad. So there's no chance that I have a dad who went to the House of Lords.
Yeah, and me neither, because I grew up in a council house, and the idea that I was going to end up in the House of Lords, my dad was a painter and decorator. I don't know whether for services to Dulux or something, maybe he would have got some award bestowed upon him, but so we're in the same boat in that respect. It's not about colour.
Except you have a platform, you have a radio station where you can air your views on a daily basis.
And I'm not disputing. I'm not suggesting I've been cancelled or anything, but I am saying that if I was starting this industry tomorrow and you and I were there tomorrow as two 20-something guys, one black, one white, you'd get the job every day in front of me.
Only if I was better than you, Ian.
No, that's not true.
That's what I'm arguing. Show me a case where that's not the case. What you're arguing is that people of colour and women who get jobs are getting them, even though they're not as good as white middle class men. That's what
every day of the week, yeah, in massive industrial scale bucket
based
loads.
On what are you basing that on?
I'm not about to start naming and shaming areas where we see the manifestation of that. Of course, most people who get a job are qualified to do the job. If you're, I don't know, an air traffic controller or you're reading the news, you've got to be able to do the gig. Nobody would dispute that. But if you look at the industrial scale efforts to tick every single box in the workplace, then it doesn't take a genius to work out that somewhere along the line you might have to, on occasions, pick people who tick a box rather than actually are better at the job.
Yeah, and that's why I no one who is fighting racism properly argues for tick box stuff. It's pointless. Or going on unconscious bias training just for the sake of it. No one's arguing for that. So I agree. Yes, it should never be a case that me or you or anyone gets a job just because of our identity. Now, if every single other person on TalkRadio, for instance, let's say all of the other presenters are white men. I'm not sure that that's the case, because I know there's a Julia Hartley-Brewer, but let's say that was the case. You must understand then, if we both went for an interview, neither of us are working, and we both went for an interview, and the person interview went, these guys are pretty much even, but you know what? We haven't got anyone from Maurice's background. I think I'm going to plump for him. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If we're equal, and the only thing different is that I happen to be of colour, that means I'm bringing something extra.
That's absolutely true. But if somebody on balance also... No, I agree with that. But if somebody on balance also said, I don't know, Collins is, he's got like maybe an extra couple of months on Maurice, so might give Collins the job. It doesn't mean to say that you've been the victim of racism.
No, I didn't say that. You were suggesting that if I got the job, it meant you'd been the victim of something.
No, I'm making the point that we live in a world where that is now the catch-all default answer to wherever there happens to be a void of non-white faces. It must be racist. You need unconscious bias training and all this cobblers.
But look around. If you look around, so it's all very well saying, oh, black people and women and are being, promoted above their station and they're everywhere. White guys can't get jobs. Look around. Like I just said, look at the presenters on your channel. Look at anyone senior in any.
Look at TV. Look at adverts on TV. You will not see a shortage of non-white faces now. Listen, Maurice, we will speak again. It's always a pleasure to lock horns with Maurice Mcleod, CEO of Race on the Agenda. What do you make of that? Over to you, 0344 499 1000.